Okay, cool. So first of all, thank you guys for the invitation to do this, and Debbie, thank you for coordinating all this. I know it's a lot of stuff to do while doing grad school and work and things. Just to give you guys a little information, my name is Bob Helmer. I graduated from the school library teacher program in 2004, I think, so 13, 14 years ago. I've spent 10 of my 14 years in school libraries overseas. I'm currently in my fourth year at the Singapore American School, where I'm the high school librarian, and I also am considered a library teacher here. I teach a class called AT Seminar, which is really kind of a research methods and argumentative writing class, and then I'm in the program called the Catalyst Program, which is a project-based program, one semester where students get to explore their interests and pursue their passions in kind of new and flexible ways. So really about 75% of my job right now is really more on the teaching side, and about 25% is kind of the more traditional backdrop library side. The way that I kind of wanted to frame this, guys, for you was to really kind of organizationally talk about who I am and my journey and kind of how I got here. Simmons had a huge impact on actually getting here and kind of the network I developed there. Then talk a little bit about international school job listings and stuff at agencies, and then possibly some advice and kind of tips for people who are looking to go internationally, especially within a school context, of what some of the people that I talk to and interact with, what they're looking for in kind of employees in that sense. Also, what I did is at the top of the chat box, if you can scroll up, you can get to a document that's just called Simmons SCIRRT International School Libraries, Bob Helmer. What you can do is you can find the organization there, but I've also hot linked sites on there that are some of the professional sites that I go to. One, to look for job postings. Two, to become part of these kind of consortiums and kind of job agencies. And three, just for some other places to go that can help you understand where a bunch of these kind of international schools would be. So again, my name is Bob. 10 years doing this. I can't believe that actually. That's kind of a realization today that it's been that long here overseas. It all started when I was in 5th grade. I played a lot of Where in the World's Carmen Sandiego, and I actually got super into the idea of traveling through research and writing, but also there was an opportunity when I was a kid in 5th grade to go to Australia. And unfortunately, my parents weren't able to make that happen. But there was something about that experience that I still go back to that was kind of burnt in my memory of being really formative in the sense of wanting to travel the world and wanting to see what else is out there. Outside of a small town in upstate New York, and just kind of understand that. So the travel bug bit me early, but I didn't actually get to put it in place until much later. I worked my way partially through undergrad, and when I got to grad school, I'd always wanted to travel. I was an anthropology major in undergrad, and I ended up meeting somebody at school named Hattie Fern, who I think is still a teacher in New Hampshire. She was wonderful. She had taught in Quito, Ecuador, and we were hanging out one day, and she's just like, yeah, I did this. I taught in Quito. I was there 3 years. It's amazing. And I was like, how did you do that? And she said, I'll show you, and I'll tell you. So she kind of walked me through the process of going through a job fair, kind of coached me on what to say, and kind of pointed me in the direction, like I'm going to kind of try and do with you guys today if you're interested in going through like international schools and stuff, is it helps to have just somebody give you a few things to hold on to. So Hattie kind of told me where to go and what to do, and I had a lot of business experience before, and I was in grad school about halfway through the school library teacher program. I was doing it full-time over 10 months, and she told me to go check out a couple of these agencies, and I'll talk a little bit more about these later, but in the terms of reaching out to them, I was told no a lot. And that was something that really struck me early on was when you start to do this stuff, especially if you start to go internationally, you're going to get a lot of people saying no and a lot of people saying why. One of the search agencies told me that I had no experience. I know I'd been doing a practicum in Brookline for a couple months, but if I didn't have any experience in school libraries, they wouldn't even take me to their job fair. I contacted another agency and they said, well, why don't you apply? And part of that is it's like $250 to apply to some of these agencies. You can post stuff up, schools can look at you, you can look at them, you can try and connect or not. And one of the people at this International School Services, her name was Jane, really was open to the idea of having me go to a job fair and be like, why not try it? I was lucky enough to go to the job fair in New York City and actually get a job at the last school, the last table before the fair ended, and it was the Santa Cruz Cooperative School in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. which has been put to me as it's kind of one of those last stops on the trains of international schools, but it was a wonderful formative experience in terms of getting a lot of experience with K-12 school libraries. Also learning Spanish to a degree, though it's been 14 years and I forgot a lot of that, sadly. But when I was hired there, the director of the school was really focused on a couple things. And he kind of looked at the program at Simmons and he said, you know, I've looked at your resume and I've looked at the program, and here's what I need. You know, I need somebody with new ideas that's up to date on training of what real school libraries should look like in the future. 2, what the technology looks like now and in the future, and be flexible around that. And 3, just have that skill and mindset and adaptability to be able to do it. And the way that he pitched it to me was, he's like, I need a new library, I need new services. It's K-12. What do you think? And I thought I landed in gold there. It was wonderful. And what it gave me was, after 2 years of working there, I decided to go back to Boston. What it really gave me was, I was able to design a K-12 school library and see it built. I was able to develop a program and services around K-12 school libraries, and I was able to live internationally and kind of understand that kind of cultural context that exists within international schools, but then also within a different country. So going back to 5th grade, I was able to kind of make that travel more real there. And again, Bill was the director of the school in Santa Cruz was very formative in that sense of being able to do that. After that, I ended up going back to Boston. I worked in Boston Public Schools for 2 years. Then my wife and I decided we wanted to go back internationally. So I eventually got a job at the International School of Prague in the Czech Republic, where I spent 4 years as the middle school and high school librarian there. I was a head librarian, and I was able to redo another library and actually start to see how libraries were changing, especially within the mid-2000s, about 2008 to 2009, in this kind of rapid shift into a different tech and services with it. Also, I got a lot of experience with technology, and I got a lot of experience working in another different culture, and actually had an administrative role where I had to kind of set the programming and goals and services and do the evaluations for all the staff. So it was kind of a bump up. So each time that I would go international, it was a bump up of responsibilities, roles, and evolving services. After 4 years there, we decided it was time to go back to the States for a little while. I ended up got very lucky and ended up at a school called Sidwell Friends School in Washington, D.C., where I spent 2 years, again, kind of building services and programs, doing some enhancements to the library, but also I met some people who now I kind of consult with now in Singapore. So a group called Education Collaborators, and what they do is they do a bunch of ed tech and library consultation around the world. And after 2 years in Sidwell Friends, this school and Singapore American School popped up, and a friend of mine was living here and working here at the time and asked me if I wanted to come be a part of this, and kind of nudged me to apply. So it's been 4 years here. One thing I kind of want to hit on is, and highlight as I'm talking through this, is the power of networking and the power of understanding people and building connections. It's one big thing that I think I saw really important at Simmons when I was talking to Hattie, but also some of the other students at Simmons, and working with that. But then throughout the career of keep building these kind of contacts out in this network, because eventually everybody you meet overseas could potentially be somebody who kind of vouches for you when it comes to a job and the future and stuff. So let's go on to kind of the how to get the jobs. It's kind of my context and where I'm kind of coming from. But the how to get a job is kind of the hardest part, because without kind of just with just Googling it, you may not guess some of these agencies. So the first one is this, and I'll just go down the kind of tick boxes in this sheet. There's two of them: Search Associates and International School Services. I've used each one of these once. Both have treated me very well. I've been able to get jobs through both. So I got the job through ISS in Bolivia, and then actually Search Associates in Prague. So how these agencies work is you normally apply to become a part of this kind of job sharing, job kind of posting platform. And it's usually about $250 when I was doing it. It may be a little more now, but what you do is you apply to this agency. They'll accept you or not accept you. And then what you do is you start to build out your resume, portfolio, you start to add recommendations in there. And employers can look at you, and you can look at profiles at the school. Now, what these agencies also do is they actually have these things called job fairs. And these job fairs actually pop up a couple times a year. Usually there's one in like Bangkok, usually there's one in London, and usually there's one on the East Coast of the US and maybe on the West Coast at different times. But these job fairs you'll get invites to, and this is where you go to, when I went, it was one of the hotels in Cambridge on the other side of the river. And I was able to go there, and the first time I went, it was in New York City. But a big piece of those job fairs is you have 150, 200 schools from around the world all consolidated in one place, and they have a list of the people they're looking for. And they're going to be in a big ballroom, and they'll have their list of what the positions are. And you carry around your resume, and you kind of pitch yourself to all these people. It's super stressful. You get told no a lot. And it's not super easy. But the thing is, if you're going to go international, you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to, one, pitch yourself, and two, put yourself out there in a way and not take no for an answer with it. So these kind of job fairs you'll go, and if you're a part of it, what's going to happen is you'll have interviews, and you'll go to people's like hotel offices, kind of they're almost like the rooms that these people are staying in, and you'll have interviews, and you'll kind of run the gauntlet. So you may talk to 10 people one day, 10 different schools. You may talk to one. It all depends what people are looking for and what you're kind of looking for too, and if it's a good match. What historically has happened is, after the job fair, you usually have an offer, and what you do is you usually have a little bit of time to kind of understand what that offer is. And at that job fair, you'll get the salary, you'll get the benefits, you'll get kind of what the relocation allowance is, you'll get an idea of what the director and the school's like. And a lot of it is just kind of meet and greet and kind of understanding each other. I think one cool thing about going to the job fairs is you meet a lot of different people. You can see a lot of different schools. But also you can kind of get a vibe for what the school really wants and the people you're going to work with. If you're going to go kind of international within the schools, there's a lot of trust put in the fact that the hiring is good, and a little bit of meet and greet will kind of decrease that stress of questioning, like how you're going to react, like what do you actually like in face to face. Those are kind of the more historical ways to go about international teaching. There's kind of, it's morphing from what I understand as I talk to people about how they're going out and actually getting jobs. One place people go to is this place Thai Online. It's a kind of a job posting website. And what you can do is you can register and you can put in your details and stuff, and it's not going to link you up, but it's basically creating a database of like what jobs are out there and a database of like who's available. And then the schools and the people can kind of contact each other. So they may not have job fairs, but you can connect through that kind of thing. And then another one is this U.S. Department of the State. There's a schools worldwide listing. So it seems to me that there's some transition going from these kind of traditional job fairs where you go to one place and it's central and doing everything, to people really applying to like single schools at a time, or just a couple schools. Like if you say, my family and I, we only want to live in Singapore, Bangkok, or Jakarta. We don't really want to go to New Delhi, or we don't want to go to Johannesburg. You would look on that site, and what you can see are all the schools that are accredited by the U.S. Department of the State. And what they're doing is they're saying that they would send American kids, they would vouch for American kids going to those schools and getting a really good education. I've known friends who have went directly to the different schools, and it works out really well for them, because they're like kind of pick and choose. Now, the thing is, the job you want may not be open that year you want to go. So there's always going to be this give and take back and forth of what this is like. When I applied to Singapore American School, again, I had a friend who was working in the school itself, and he was the one who kind of tipped me off about what was going on and that I should apply. So I've kind of run the gauntlet of a bunch of different ways to go about getting the international job. The big thing is make sure you can pitch yourself and clearly articulate why you'd be a good fit for that school, but also just putting yourself out there in a way that's going to make it so that you're comfortable in the way that you're doing things, but also you're putting your best face forward in doing it. So I want to talk a little bit too about some tips and stuff that I'm hearing from administrators. I've talked to a couple this week of people I work with, and I very much trust their opinions of hiring and kind of what they're doing. This is going to be on that spreadsheet too. And actually, you know what? Before we get going too far, let me just pause right there before we go. Are there any questions as of right now that you want to ask before we kind of dive into the tips and things like that? If you do, you can just type them in the message box, and what I can do is do my best to answer. Great question. How long before you got a job, you got your first job and you applied for a job? I was in grad school, so I didn't really, a lot of the jobs in the United States hadn't opened up yet. So what I did is I applied, I think it was late January to the job fair. And then the job fair was in the middle of February. And then going to the job fair with a packet of resumes and kind of ready to kind of pitch myself and talk about myself. So probably when I started looking for a job, it was late January, and probably when I signed the contract for Bolivia, it was mid to late February. Now, historically, that hasn't been the case. When I went to Prague, I'd applied to Search Associates, and that would have been, and I started that application process maybe in November, December. And then that job didn't open up, and kind of that didn't come to fruition until February. What I'm finding now is there's actually a lot of, from talking to people, a lot of these schools are kind of opening up their positions in October. Is they'll have postings in October, and people kind of get in very quickly. I knew people in Prague that the job opened in middle of October. They had a job 5 days later in Prague. I've known people here in Singapore. The process may take a week to 2 weeks. It may take 3, 4. It kind of goes school by school. But if you're going to go to one of these job fairs, you got to be ready to commit early, apply early, because the earlier you can commit and apply, the more when people start to go in and look at these databases, you're going to have kind of the best pick of jobs potentially coming down the line. When I applied here to Singapore, I applied, I think, early December, and I had the job a week later. But they were very fast about the way they did things. They did not play around. It was very quick. It was applied. There was like 5 days. There was an interview. There was another interview 2 days later, and then an offer with another interview, kind of contingent on that. So there's going to be some flexibility and variation within the schools. What you may find is some of the European schools may move a little slower. Those job postings may not come out until the spring. And that just has to do with some of the law kind of around, especially when you're dealing with Germany and other places that have really strong labor unions, is you may not have to, like, say you're leaving your job in October. You may say, I don't have to tell them I'm going to leave until April. Okay, so there's some variability with our school, Singapore American School. You can tell them you can leave. You can tell them pretty much anytime you're going to leave early. Up to November, we usually have to sign a contract by early December, and but again, the earlier you do it, and the more you can commit ahead of time, the better it usually is in terms of being able to have that variety of jobs. So, our international institutions hiring long-term positions or more short-term, like a few semesters or such. I've seen a lot of different ones. So the way my contract works is, and actually all the schools I worked at internationally, you first sign a 2-year contract. And a part of that 2-year contract is to make sure, you know, that they bring you over and they take you back at the beginning and end of the contract. The really good thing about that is if you're not super happy the first year and you come back the second year and you're still not happy, it's 2 years of your life. You get 2 years to do it. And all these schools operate mainly on this kind of North American calendar. So I have 13 weeks off a year. Like I spent 8 weeks in the United States in the summer. And it's super nice. So we're kind of bouncing back and forth all the time. In terms of short term, I've seen some schools offer 1-year contracts. I knew a school in Venezuela that used to do that 1 year to 1 year, because they were like, you may not be able to commit more than that. That's okay. I've seen some schools offer short-term ones and bring people over and do things with it. There's some variability. It may maybe school to school. And then for semesters and stuff like that, again, that would be kind of that short-term hire. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the ones that I go to and the ones that I know about are really kind of focused specifically on schools. In terms of kind of international archives and stuff like that, I think Colin Lukens would be a good guy to talk to, and Alyssa Pacey would be good to talk to about kind of what that would be like. I haven't seen a lot of bigger jobs open up in terms of archives, at least in Singapore, the Czech Republic, and Bolivia. Part of it was with the Czech Republic, there would have been a big language barrier unless you spoke Czech. Here in Singapore, you don't really have to speak anything other than English. There's 4 dominant language here, and with English, you're really able to do a lot of it. And most of the kind of library services I've seen are in English. I think that would be a good question with that, with the archival stuff, would be for Colin or Alyssa too. Love Singapore. I love it. This is the longest I've ever stayed in a job. I re-signed a contract this year, so next year will be year 5. I really like it for a lot of different reasons. I've lived, again, in Bolivia, the Czech Republic, and Singapore overseas. Bolivia was the poorest country in Latin America. The Czech Republic is beautiful and also still Eastern in a way. So it's a lot different than Western Europe. And Singapore is this kind of hybrid of Asia. But it's a place where there's a lot of equality in the broad sense. It's a really safe place to live. It's really easy to get around. There's a lot of nature. The quality of life is really good. So you can you can't really see out the window there, but at the same time, I'm on the 21st story of a building kind of at the edge of downtown. So it would be maybe kind of like where I live would be in Jamaica Plain. And I would work somewhere maybe up on the other side of it, somewhere near Watertown or Belmont or somewhere like that. So it's not that bad. You can get around pretty easy, but Singapore is totally cool. It's just expensive. That's the only thing. It's much more expensive than any place I've ever lived. But the thing is, with a lot of these schools, what they'll do is they'll kind of offset that cost of living in the kind of contract and package you get from the school in terms of it. So the next question, is your visa stuff taken care of through the agencies? No. My visas are all handled by the school. So are my wife's. So I have a working pass here. My wife has a dependent pass, and we're able to do things. So historically and kind of normally, the school takes care of them. When we were in the Czech Republic, we would have to go once a year and take our passports down to an agency, and we'd have to wait, anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours in line to get our visas renewed. And when I was in Bolivia, it was the same way too. So the kind of host organization you're working with, the school or organization, has taken care of a lot of that stuff for us. That's actually a really good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, let's move on to a couple of these kind of advice, especially for, do abroad institutions pay better, worse than local? Depends where you're going to live. So I think a big piece of it, when I was in Bolivia, I was doing very well for living in Bolivia. But when I would go back to Boston in the summer, the money didn't go very far. And that's because it's kind of a cost of living adjustment. In Singapore, it's much better. It's also very expensive, so you have to make more. When I was in the Czech Republic, it was pretty good. It was a really good package in that the insurance was super good too. And a part of it is as you need to look at the conversion rate of, like, if you go somewhere, how much can you save? And then how much is the cost of living? So kind of when people ask me about what the differences are, what you should look for going overseas, I would say look for savings potential with it, compared to kind of the cost of living and stuff like that. And in terms of better or worse than local, I'm not sure, because the 2 years I worked in Washington, D.C., and the 2 years in Boston Public Schools, I was there a short amount of time. And historically, kind of a school is the longer time you stay, the more money you make over time. But the interesting bit about kind of working in an American system in the actual United States is it ties you into a lot of different kind of things that you can do with your money, like Roth IRAs or pension programs and things like that, where living overseas, you may not be able to access those unless you kind of really understand the nuances of some of the tax issues. Cool. Okay, great. Some advice. What I did is I talked to a couple of my friends and people that I really respect their opinion on. in terms of hiring here, and kind of who have been overseas for a while or have seen pretty massive transitions within libraries and what they got. And a friend of mine in Luxembourg, he's the head of education and media technology at the International School of Luxembourg. He's got a great blog called beyonddigital.org. It's wonderful. He's a brilliant leader. He says, he looks for a learning leader, somebody who's student-centered, somebody who embraces digital literacy, someone who's solution-focused and a problem solver, and a risk-taker, critical thinker, and of course, love of reading. I really do think with the way that libraries are moving and what we're doing in this, we're kind of going, especially beyond the transformations from the last 15 years, that kind of critical thinking and that risk-taking is really beneficial, and focusing on the solutions. One thing that he really taught me a lot about kind of overseas teaching and overseas librarianship is really to focus on the collaboration behind it and try and build those networks and connections again with people and try and leverage that and the resources you have in terms of information literacy and digital literacy to actually teach kids and enhance their learning. The principal I work for now, his name is Dr. Darren Farney. Here's what he kind of has to say about the school libraries and stuff. School librarians, he's like, they should be flexible. Willing to connect with the host country to further cultural competence for your students. Must be willing to teach. Some schools will not have the resources for a non-teaching librarian. He would not hire a non-teaching librarian. Currently, I teach those two classes, AP Seminar and Catalyst. And with the collaborative classes, it's pretty much like 75% of my time is total face time with kids. I do have the luxury within that system of having 3 library assistants, which is really kind of unheard of. It's different. I have one person who really focuses on kind of the archives and stuff that we created over the last 4 years. So she's kind of the archive, kind of electronic resources person. I have somebody else that really kind of handles the budget and some of the cataloging stuff. And I have one person who really kind of handles kind of some promotional stuff and coordinates with the space and coordinates with volunteers. The space I work in, I'm trying to think how big it would be in terms of Simmons. If you took the bottom floor of I don't know if they've done a redo of the actual library school building, but if you took that first floor all the way across, it's probably 1.5 of those. It's this massive library. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we have a lot of kind of assistance and a lot of eyes on people of what's going on there. Back to Darren's stuff, he says libraries are no longer about books. They need to rethink this paradigm. He's really pushed me to kind of try and understand what this means better, but also living overseas brings a really interesting challenge in the sense of if you don't have access to really good resources in English, if your dominant language is in English, you need to import them. And there's always going to be shipping and taxes on that. So that's going to eat part of your budget too. So you have to find creative ways to try and think through that. The other thing he says is teacher outreading connections are a must. If you are an introvert that would rather hide in the book stacks, I respect that. However, you're going to have to fake it till you make it. Get out there and you'll be disconnected from life of school if you're not. I really do think that a big piece of these international school jobs is being kind of a community liaison, not only with the host country, just understanding how people work, the mentality, but also connecting people. There's a tendency sometimes going overseas, you can exist in a bubble of kind of Americanness, expats away. One beautiful thing about living in Singapore is you don't have to do that because the language barrier is very minimal everywhere you go. But also just being connected to people. Part of the one thing I love about libraries is it's really about services and programs, and you have to be extroverted. I'm an extroverted introvert, so I'm comfortable with the extroversion, but I need the introversion. I need a place to kind of go. But I couldn't do that all the time. So much of my job is out there face-to-face with students and staff and faculty and community members that I really have to be out there. And then he says libraries are places of collaboration now. You must provide loud and quiet for kids in the community. We're going through a really big shift at Singapore American School in terms of redesigns, and we have some broader kind of whole campus renovations coming down the line in the next 5 years. And as we go through this is one thing we're thinking about is how do you build in that collaboration zone while also having this kind of quiet area. It's a really interesting tension to see on a big scale. The school I work at now has 4,000 kids total and about 600 faculty and staff members.
And the high school itself has 1,300 kids and about 120 faculty and staff members. So it's a big space, it's a big school, and trying to design with that kind of stuff in mind, especially in the tropics where everything kind of, the weather will eat through things, it provides a really interesting paradigm and challenge. But like he said, there are places of collaboration now, so how do you make that kind of happen? So how do you plan for the collaboration, but then how do you provide services that actually engage people? I did also talk to the director of my school today. His name's Dr. Chip Kimball. And one thing he really stressed about people who are going overseas, what he thinks is they really need to be culturally competent and open to the host culture, is really trying to be able to understand how people would think, how they act, how they understand why they're doing things they're doing, but also really honorable and respectful in kind of interacting with those communities and actually going out and doing it. Again, there can be that kind of expat bubble thing going on, and what you want to do is try and crack through that. He also said one thing that really mattered is for librarians internationally to really have high EQ, so that emotional intelligence, in order to kind of deal with people and work with people and kind of understand them, but also saying that they're a visionary, and this kind of shift in libraries and paradigm shift of like, what does information look like in the future? What do services look like? What does reading look like in general? How do you engage people? But then also that you needed to really be the expert in information literacy. You really needed kind of, from his perspective, it came to me that he really wanted all four of those, but he said the biggest thing is the cultural competence. When you work kind of outside the United States and you're working in an international context, you're going to deal with people who are from very different settings and may think very differently than you culturally, and what you have to do is be able to be adaptable and adjust to that and still get things done in the context of whatever your job description would be. So those are kind of the tips. My big tip for anybody going internationally, just kind of aside from these three people, is really take some time and build networks. Your networks, you can leverage them and you can actually make it work in a very different way. Most of my professional learning, growth, and also down the line, more and more of the way that I'm able to actually solve problems and the way that I'm able to get jobs is through networks. Is people are invaluable to me that I can rely on to help me answer questions, problem solve, just be a thought partner, be a cognitive coach. But also there are times I'll just get emails from people that are saying, hey, I have this new idea and I'm working at this school. Like, what do you think? Are you available? The more you can network, especially not only in Simmons, but also the more you can work your professional networks and start to build those out, the better you're going to be over time. That would be my one huge thing is really think about the networks and how to do that and make that work starting now. Let's see, do you guys have any questions about that? Or anything in general? One question I've got, best player. Okay, Debbie, let me get to that in a second. One question I've got before was from other people. They've asked me about going internationally, and they're like, well, I have a family. And I think if you have a family and you want to go to international, you all have to be on the same page and you all have to be committed. But also know that some of the schools will totally take a family, some of the schools may not. A lot of the people I know have gone internationally with a partner. And what they've been able to do is they've both had jobs, which makes it easier. My wife does not work at the school full time, but I'm still able to have the job and do it. So we've been able to make it work. Debbie, you said the best place to start networking, right there at Simmons. Start there. Start there, put yourself out there, go volunteer, get experience, join panels, join groups, and keep in contact with people. And just be really nice. We live in a world that is very odd right now, and I think being kind amongst the chaos is a really good thing right now. And then networking too, not only at Simmons, but also going out and finding those opportunities for volunteering or jobs. And once you start doing that, you can start building that network out. Another thing that I've seen from some people too in questions is like, well, what happens if you go and you don't like it? Um, my response to that is always, anytime you move or change, it's going to be uncomfortable. So every time I've moved to a new place or started a new job, there's always been a period of discomfort. Um, Singapore was less because there wasn't so much of the culture shock around the language, where I didn't have to try and learn Spanish or didn't have to try and wrap my head around Czech to make it work. But it was still shocking in terms of the job, the pace, being 12 hours away from our families via Skype and stuff like that, and just literally being on the other side of the world. The other thing is, the shocking thing about here is you just sweat a lot because it's like 90 degrees day in, day out here and sunny and humid. So there's always going to be that, if you go and you really don't like it, you just have to give it some time. And again, build the networks, start trying to make friends, go find those places to meet people. That can be really hard for people. The first couple of months cannot be very fun. Any tips for dealing with culture shock? Take time. don't judge at first. As much as you want to say, I hate this isn't fun, this sucks, why did I do this? Surrender to the fact that you made a deliberate decision in your life to do something very different. And also think of it as just like, what you're doing then is not the end point of your whole life. What you're doing is just a piece of a bigger puzzle and travel opportunities to move. So, and also try and find one thing a day that you do that is either new or stimulating. I remember I would go in Bolivia, I'd go for runs or long walks, or I'd go try and have different food. But what I did do too is I eventually found a couple of really good coffee shops and would just go kind of sit and take a book or take a journal with me and write and look out over this beautiful plaza. And it was hard because I didn't understand a lot, but also I was away from people I loved, and I was kind of dealing with that transition into a new job. But taking the time to really find some places that you can settle into and just find some peace and quiet, and also the writing process really helped. Okay, one other question I want to bring up too is it's the idea of like my wife and I. My wife doesn't work at the school, but she's considered a trailing spouse or kind of a partner with you. So one thing about that, if you're going to do something like that, you need to be prepared for identity shifts, especially with people who are going and not having a clear path and job. Sometimes that has been hard for people. I've known a lot of people overseas that may have this trailing spouse. It's such a bad word for it. Or just partner who wasn't working at the school and had to kind of figure out and navigate, like, what am I supposed to do with my time? I used to work doing something different. Now I don't have anything like that. That can be hard. But at the same time, again, you have to think of it as like, you made the decision to do the adventure. Like, you need to go out and find things to do and meet people and try and figure out a new path and give yourself the time and space to figure that out. So if there's no other questions, what I can do is, you guys have that document I kind of went over that have all the hot links for actually going through and especially kind of focusing on school libraries. You can look at that doc, but also anytime whoever's interested in kind of going overseas that is affiliated with Simmons can always reach out to me. My email is actually on that doc. Feel free to reach out to me. If I don't respond back to you within like a day, don't flip out. Just know that it's probably in the doc somewhere and I'm going to get to it. But I love talking to people about trying to go overseas. I love talking to people about schools. I love talking to people about education. So feel free anytime to email me. I am also back in the States over the summer. So if you have questions and you want to have a cup of coffee in Boston or sit down and stuff, we can try and make that work out. Debbie, is there anything else? Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for attending, and thank you guys for inviting me to do this. Again, I love school libraries. I love education. I love working with students, and I really enjoyed my time at Simmons, and it really helped shape my life. So thank you guys for the opportunity. And again, if you have questions and stuff, you can always reach out. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And the flu season isn't too bad. Oh, that sounds bad. Okay, what I'll do is I'll end this session now. Thank you all very much.